Well, I'm here with Michael Weithorn, writer and director of Best You Can. Hey, Michael, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Eric?
So I guess we start with what gets something like this because this is sort of like a character piece. It's got its plot for sure, but it's definitely a character piece. How does idea like this kind of formulate? Because usually you have like a high concept, and that's pretty easy to nail down on paper. But something that's got sort of characters kind of meandering or mingling with each other seems a little
Yeah.
more nebulous.
No, it's a good question. Mostly worked in television, for my career, and there's a particular methodology that you need because of the sheer quantity of stuff you have to come up with in sort of how do you work out a story and move it along the assembly line and so on. But then when I started getting interested in making films, I realized it was a very different process and kind of felt my way through. I did a film in 2011 called A Little Help, and similar to this one in the sense that there was no overriding concept. It was more driven by characters, and I kept a notebook. I still keep a notebook of things that occur to me just that are interesting character moments or dynamics that can form that feel like they would create story. In this case, in the case of The Best You Can, my wife and I had dinner with a couple probably about 10 years ago, which was the same configuration as Cynthia and Warren in the film. In other words, she was in her late 50s, he was in his early 80s or mid 80s, and they had been together for 25 years or something. They had met when he was at the prime of his career. He was a very established guy. He was an orthopedic surgeon or something, I think. And he was extremely, dynamic and everything. And now he was starting to fade a little bit. And I could see in her face as we had dinner that she was helping him struggle with the phone and that it was on speaker and he didn't realize it. And he's like, it's so loud. And some of these kind of older man kind of things. I don't know if I imagined it or saw it, but at any rate, it created in my mind this idea of how interesting for a woman in that position to sort of feel like her strong giant of a husband is slipping away, and what does that mean to her, and the loneliness and sort of difficulty that might come with that. So that dynamic interested me. Character like Stan is a character. I've had variations in my mind at different times, kind of lovable loser, somebody who underachieves based on their intelligence and capabilities. The idea of how in the electronic communication age that people can form connections that they never would have been able to form before. I mean, if you look at the film Stan and Cynthia in any previous era, would never have, there'd been no opportunity for them to ever, even if he, came to her house during a robbery and so on, that would have been the end of it. And they never would have gotten into any personal conversations, at least not believably. You can put anything in a film, but if you want it to ring true. And so I was sort of playing around how those elements fit together, and that whether, Cynthia in this situation needing, not even realizing she needs a friend, companionship, support, and so finds it in this very unlikely place of this guy who is very different in every way other than, their age. They're born in the same day of the same year. So, it's putting these pieces together, but letting, as you said originally, letting the characters drive the story. Like what would come organically out of these people and the situation that they're in? What would happen? And so I only loosely outline and I sort of let the script kind of go where it wanted to go. And then obviously had a lot of stuff I couldn't use and honed it down and everything. But it was just my own slapdash kind of method. It wouldn't they wouldn't teach it in any, screenwriting class, but it works for me.
Yeah. And so in this kind of what you mentioned with the characters, they do without giving anything away, characters do things that are probably unforgivable to most people. But you still end up on their side. And so like what's that balance? How do you make a character do something terrible, but then the audience hasn't rejected them yet? We're still following them.
I think the key to that, and first of all, I don't know if I would characterize anyone did in the movie as terrible, so much as sort of violating the normal boundaries of what a good person, decent
Yeah,
person might
that's
do.
fair.
No, I'm not, I'm just saying,
Yeah,
no, no
she
one, no
didn't
one
she didn't
murders
kill a
anyone.
baby and throw it against a
No,
wall or
exactly.
anything like that.
The key to me is, look, we all are flawed and we all do things. And if you ask anybody and you give them truth serum, say, what things have you done in your life that you think, you're kind of ashamed of and wish you hadn't done, or that came out of a moment of weakness, or that you're not proud of in retrospect. Everybody would have their list. And nobody is free of those things. So I think the key is writing it, casting it, playing it in a way that feels real and believable. So it's not that what the person does is what you're judging them by, but that whether you're on the journey and you may even wince and go, oh, don't do that, but you get it. You understand why they made that choice in that moment because they're human and you're human. And so you relate to them on that level. But it's all really in the execution, I think. And if you get on board, if you can get viewers on board with a character, you can take them to some places they weren't expecting as long as it doesn't ever violate their basic kind of humanity.
When you get an ensemble like this, and definitely a character piece, does that make it easier or more difficult to kind of involve the actors into the writing, so to speak, like maybe adjust just what a character says or what a character does when you know that a certain actor is going to be in that, and then be able to talk about that?
Well, I wrote the script before it was cast, and you obviously try to cast to the script and an actor who will be able to bring their own sensibility to a character. That was one of the things that was, from coming out of the half-hour comedy world, and learning. I did a film in 2011, so this is my second one, and it's been a process of learning the difference between filmmaking and TV making. And one of that is that in film, you really do need to, control, not control, I should say, not try to control things as tightly, but rather hire actors who you believe in and let them find their own interpretation of the characters. But obviously you've cast them in a way that whatever that is going to be consistent and work with what you've written. And they're not, if they're miscast, then, you got a mess on your hands. So I enjoy the process. Kevin Bacon, for example, I mean, everyone in the cast I would say this of, but it was really, aside from just trying to get the film done, my experience in making it was like I get to watch this guy, and true with Kira as well. I watch these people work their craft that they've honed over 30, 40 years, and how they can take the words and breathe life into them. And I'd hear lines, I go, wow, I never heard that line in my mind that way, but that's great. I remember, the scene where they're on the phone, they're having an actual phone call, and he's in front of his building, sitting on the stoop and leaning on the car. In that scene, I remember when the day we shot that, it was one of these things where even when we shot the first take of him, I was just like, wow, this guy is really locked in on this character, and it's all so subtle. It's all behind the eyes. It's not showy. But it's real and it's compelling. And so it was, in addition to very hard work and trying to fulfill my own task of getting the film made, it was just a fun show to watch these people do their thing. And I really have such great respect for great actors like that.
Excellent. And so you've done writing, producing, directing, but you've not done all of them at the same time all the time. Like when you write a script, what's the difference between you wanting to direct the movie that you wrote the script for, and you want to direct someone else's script, or you're going to produce this one and write this one, or direct this
I,
one and produce this one, or what goes into that thought, or is it just kind of random?
Well, I haven't produced or directed anything that I didn't write. For me, it all comes out of being a writer. Even on the TV shows that I did, I didn't write every episode, but I oversaw the writing, and I wrote the pilots and wrote multiple episodes, but didn't write every. But you have a writing staff, and you develop a certain sensibility that the staff, the members of the staff understand, and we rewrite everything together, and ultimately I would have the final say in that. But I'm not a producer in the sense of I have different projects. I'm producing this or producing. I don't do that. I just kind of write stuff that I'm interested in writing, and then in the film world, I'm not a director for hire. I wouldn't, want to do that. I wouldn't even really know how to do that. There's certain kinds of scenes that I wouldn't know how to direct at all technically, and I wouldn't want to put myself in that position. I just really wanted to direct as an extension for me of the writing process to now go to the next level. Okay, I have the script. How do I bring it to the screen? How do I make sure that that it's mine and I'm not handing it off to somebody? Not that there are other people who might not have done a very nice job directing the stuff I've written in film, but I just wanted the experience of doing it, of making it my thing. And so, for me, it all is just writing is just the sort of fans out into the other functions to get to the finish line with it.
Excellent. Well, Best You Can will be available on VOD platforms on November 25th. And yeah, everyone should go check it out. But before we go, just want to get a movie recommendation from you, either something that's personal to you or a movie that's like, this one's really good and no one talks about it.
hmm Interesting that no one talks about. Well, I was going to say before you said that last qualifier.
Well, we can do
Yeah.
both if you got two of
Okay.
them.
Well, one of the the reason I'm thinking of this movie is because Redford, died recently, and The Way We Were is just one of my all-time favorite films, and was in a very kind of thematic way an inspiration to me for this film, in specifically the idea of a very unlikely pairing of people developing a very intimate relationship who you would not expect to, but having that happen on screen in a way that you believe. And you say, wow, you never think these two would get together, but they do. And I get why. I get why for each of them, the other was a person they were drawn to. And that to me is really compelling. Another film, Midnight Cowboy, in its own very different way, is about that same theme. And so I'm just really drawn to that. I like the idea that for people who are lonely and isolated in their lives, the idea that there is somebody, if they can somehow, if circumstance, sends them to that person, that they can really have a true friend and companion and someone they can, make them feel a little bit better about being alive.
Nice. Well, Michael, thanks for joining me today.
You bet.
And congratulations on the movie. Everyone go check out Best You Can. It's really good.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.